I bumped my head today rather severely. Have a look at this. Where is it? Somewhere there, look. Oh, I can tell you that was very painful. One of my lovely viewers had been chopping down a tree. It was diseased and it had to come down. And he said, Richard, I don't know whether you'd be of any use to you. I know you've got a wood burning stove. And I said, oh, that's very kind of you. Yes, please. So it was chopped up into various large slabs. And he said, you know, you're welcome to take it if you can pick it up. Well, it just so happened I had access to my van, so I went down to where he was and we picked it up, went with the lovely Julia, and we picked up these great big chunks of cherry tree it was. It'll have to be seasoned, so I can't use it immediately. But anyway, I was lifting one of these pieces of great big chunks of wood, lifting it up like that and stepping into my van, and I bashed my head. Now there's a sort of a little bit that juts out on the frame at the top, which is part of the locking device. So I came in, as I stepped into the van, bang! Julia turned round. She said it made an awful noise, this sort of metal on meat. And I said, yes, well, I felt that. It was extremely painful, and it is a little tender now. Anyway, we got the rest of the logs in, and I hadn't got any concussion or anything like that, but it was quite painful. But on the way back, as we drove back, I was thinking about this as my head was throbbing, and I thought, do you know what? It reminded me that I was human, that I was flesh and blood, that I wasn't a machine or anything like that. I was a human being. And I like being a human being. I don't want to be a machine. I actually quite like the fact that I'm mortal, that I'm going through different ages, that I'm experiencing life in many different ways. And I love it, even though occasionally you can get yourself a bit brained by things. And here we go. This is a cat. I'm looking after this cat for my partner, the lovely Julia, at the moment. And I actually quite like, I've never had a, well, when I was married and the kids were small, we had a pet. I'll get loads of views now because I've got a cat. That's what happens, isn't it, on YouTube? Anyway, the point was, it was that business about being human, being alive, living. And I love living. I like being a human being. Look at this jumper. Here's a jumper, for example. Now, you might think, oh, that's a bit retro, isn't it? It was knitted, again, by one of my lovely viewers. My viewers, I have to say, are the best in the world. And Mary Hammond, it sounds like a fashion label, doesn't it? It's a Mary Hammond jumper. She knitted this. She's knitted a number of jumpers for me. And in the past, I'd particularly asked for sort of that retro 1940s style. What are you up to? Don't go and bite that. Which competing against a cat is not ideal. And anyway, the point being, this jumper, it was knitted by hand by somebody sitting there and spending the time using their fingers. I think that is an absolute joy. That's amazing. Don't you think that? Go on, Mojo. Off you go. Upstaging me. It's outrageous. So that's, again, it's just something that people can do. Craftspeople can do these amazing things. It's a skill. I know that there's a lot of women that can still knit. But when you think back to the old days, knitting, crocheting, repairing things, all sorts of people did loads of amazing things with their hands. And I often hark back to those days because I think there's something missing if we're not being able to do something and be creative and be human and live. I dropped my wallet earlier today as well, and it flung open and I nearly lost a £10 note. It came out and I went, oh, blimey, hang on. And I scrabbled after it, a tenner. Well, nobody wants to lose a tenner, do they? And I got hold of the note and I looked at it and it reminded me that it was visceral, that it was in my hand. It was a real thing. It wasn't digital, wasn't on a card. I could see it. it represented £10. It represented something, and I knew what I could and what I couldn't buy with it. And I realised when I picked that up and I looked at that with the Queen's head on it, although we will soon have them with the King's head, which will be interesting, because all my life money has always had the Queen's head on it. But anyway, I looked at that money and I thought, I like money, I like cash, I like the old-fashioned cash. When I was younger, of course, I'm just in that age bracket that remembers the old pounds, shillings and pence and sixpences and halfpennies and what you could buy when you went to the old sweet shop, you know, for a penny or a quarter of this, and you would get those what were they, funny enough, blackjacks and rhubarb and custards, were they? Used to get so many sweets, sticks of licorice and stuff. Money seemed to have value. You seem to be able to buy so much with it, and it is a remarkable thing. I'm not so keen on the idea of having it all digital and having it all where I can't see it and having to explain myself. I even took some money out the bank the other day because I like to use cash these days, and I asked the teller behind, or the tiller behind the thing, I said, is it true? I said, I've heard this weird rumour that if you take out certain amounts of money, you actually get asked, what are you going to spend it on? And I said, I'm sorry if that sounds like a spurious thing, but I've read this or heard it on the internet. You know, obviously we don't believe everything you read on the internet. But the lady behind the till said, no, that's perfectly true, we do. And I must have looked shocked. I said, but why? Why would you want to know? Surely it's none of your business. Oh, it's in case of fraud. It's in case of scams. And I thought, well, OK, that's fair enough. But if it's cash and I'm handing it to somebody, that's my business, surely. It's not your business. I could understand if it's an online bank transaction, that sort of thing. But I didn't really understand, because it's not like you can say to the bank, well, I want to see this bloke who's got some dodgy furniture in the back of his van, and I don't know where it's come from, and I'm doing a shady deal. It's not like, hang on a minute, bank manager, would you just come down and just check him out? Is it okay if I do that? I mean, that's my own. If I do that, I take the responsibility like I would have done. And I like that, because cash to me is a private transaction. It's got nothing to do with the bank. Why would I want them involved? If I want to accidentally waste my money and do silly things with it, surely that's up to me. It's not for the bank to be able to tell me what I can do with my own money that I've put into their establishment, that they have made a profit on by investing it here, there and everywhere. That seems a very strange thing. So I'm very much these days more and more wedded to cash. I like it. I like it. Popped into a church today. It's been a busy day. It has been a busy day. I popped into a church with my lovely girlfriend, the lovely Julia. We were filming for The English Couple, which I have a link in the description to. It's a slightly different show, but you're very welcome. It's all about England and exploring Englishness as a couple. It's good fun. We went into this wonderful church, and in between the filming that we were doing, I looked at this church, as I have been around many, many churches in the old days when I used to do walks on this channel. And I looked at this and I thought, yes, of course, this church represents a community over 1,000 years, with its old flint tower, its stone walls, its memorials, its carvings, its pews, its history and heritage. It's a community where people would come and do things. Yes, they had their religious beliefs and they would praise the Lord and all of that, but also they would meet and they would have a chinwag. They would have festivals and fetes. They would, of course, they would be baptized and christened, and they would get married, and of course at the end of their life they would be buried naturally. That happens. But also churches were, as I say, a hub. Often in the very early days, they would have been the most magnificent buildings in the area. Most people would have lived in much humbler property, probably timber-framed hovels of some description. So communities would have met there a bit like a church hall for all sorts of things. And at festivals, they would have had things like church ales, which was an event to raise money for the church or to give to the poor or for various things. And they would sell, of course, ale for the church and celebrate all sorts of things, the harvests and the ploughs and the seasons coming up, and be grateful and thankful. The church embodies so much. We rarely visit churches these days, and a lot of people no longer have a faith as such. But for me, that was, again, it was about living, just about living, being in a community, and that sense of being alive, being a human being, interact with your fellow man, so important. And it seems that the next generation coming up, because I mentioned I was old because I remembered the pounds, shillings and pence and things like that. I remember old-fashioned things like record players, typewriters, tape recorders, where you could see how something worked, how the armature sat on the vinyl player, and you would see it in the groove of the record, the tape going round passing the playhead. You could see when you typed the keys coming up, and invariably whenever I typed as a young, trying to learn how to type, when I was trying to write plays and things and stories and things, they would all mashed together like this, and you would have to pull them apart and change the ribbon and all of that. But there was something visceral, there was something solid, there was something real and purposeful about it. Unlike the way that technology is going, that is almost making us the machine. We're no longer the creator, we are the operator. We just use our fingers, and that's as near to the thing that we ever get these days. I do feel sorry for the next generation, because I still have one leg in the analog world and the other leg forcibly in the digital world. And the next generation, of course, don't really have that experience in analog. Their world is screens and swiping and clicking. And so many of them are wound up and controlled and spoken to through these machines that are looking at them and listening to them and trying to sell them things and telling them how to live their lives. And it seems to me a huge shame that that's happening. So I'm asking, do we really need all this tech? I mean, technical stuff is quite nice and we have progressed, but where are we going with it? Are we forgetting about the human element? Being human to me is very important. Bashing my head may be painful. Feeling the blood on my fingers as it comes seeping out of my skull may be undesirable. But it reminded me that I was human, and I like being human. I like having things that I can see how they work. I like making things with my fingers, even if it's just a mess. I think living is something very special. And I wonder if we're not careful, we're almost making the living going on in the machines, and we're just passively watching and not being part of it anymore.